What are your opinions on these meme-ish subnets that have like tokenomics to where it's like the more, or incentive mechanisms to where the more you hold of the alpha token, the more incentive you get? Do you think we'll see more of those? What is your opinion on the current ones?
Well, I feel that we will see more. I've been saying it quite a lot in my interviews over the past couple of weeks, that in 2025, novel revenue models are the new meta of Bittensor. Simulating the holding and valuation of your alpha are going to be critical to business success as a subnet. And however, I would like to see, and I've seen this has been discussed openly amongst many subnets that I either advise or have an ear to the ground in, is, what should we consider rewarding miners proportionally for the amount of alpha they hold? Now, if you're performing an action and your subnet is generating value, there are going to be lots of mechanisms you can look into to say, well, that might work, that might not work. There are some advantages, some disadvantages. Let's see how we can build out and test and play with this. Maybe we'll get it wrong, but let's try it and see. But when a subnet rocks up and says, hey, we are only rewarding for that, and our subnet does nothing else of any value, I guess I feel the same way as I do about meme coins, which is, this token does nothing. We are literally rewarding you, or we get assigning value to it because the people here before you thought it was valuable, and they want you to think it's valuable so that the people after you think it's valuable. I believe we call that a Ponzi scheme. And I guess the sour taste there that I think needs to not be overlooked is that all subnets launched with an even set of emissions. At launch, they were all 1.54, which was 100 divided by 64. And so a lot of these subnets, or this particular meme subnet you're talking about, had a chance to accumulate a lot of the alpha. So anyone that was in the know of this subnet also did. So to then announce a week later that, hey, we're going to do a subnet where people with the most alpha stand to profit, it's kind of like routing your own mining emissions to yourself. And so the cards, or the pieces are in place for those that have organized this to nicely reap value from it. And I'm interested to know, especially when the EMA is updated, how the greater community will react. Because I've seen someone sum up Bittensor as its pump fund for intellectuals. And I hope that the Bittensor community is wise enough that they will look at this and say, this is not how we want our network to be used. And so we're not playing this game. Yeah, they can go off and buy meme coins anywhere else, but they look at potentially a subnet on Bittensor, an expectation of a more admirable usage than just meme profits and exit liquidity for those that were in there early.
You hinted at this. Do you think these subnets that produce real value will adopt those same type of economic systems? So it kind of makes the meme coin subnet irrelevant because the ones actually producing value have that same type of incentive built in as well?
They will have to, but the reality is that the amount of revenue that a subnet, even if you're doing 100% buyback with all revenue, and I know Shoots have already implemented a buyback where all of the subscription revenue goes straight back into their alpha. But if you look at the valuations, especially the speculative early valuations of these subnets, and you say, is this subnet, if this subnet is turning over a volume of, for example, $1 million worth a day, are they generating anywhere close to that in revenue? Does it matter if they buy back even an optimistic revenue, 20K a day of their token compared to the speculative value that's going around? In the long term, yes, there will be requirements to build, I think, more detailed loyalty-based relationships with your miners. And I actually think this is something that is just to do with the business models being developed, that a lot of subnets will be a piece in the toolbox of businesses, but some of their business and the way they interact with their customers may actually go on outside of Bittensor. So whether it's premium services, let's say you use your subnet as a proving ground for anyone in the world to show their worth and to continue to show their worth and potentially to service the public. But you have a closed basket of private customers to whom you pick the best off the subnet and then offer a private service on the side. It would then be up to you, if you want to use revenue and profits from that, to stimulate the further growth of your subnet. And I think as we eventually enter a bear market and emissions really start to decline, then we will start from a dollar value. We'll start to understand those who have sustainable business models, sustainable businesses as a whole, and understand the ways in which they can use revenue and growth to stimulate growth, even in a declining market.
Yeah, that would be interesting. You're suggesting like a centralized company comes in, builds a subnet, so miners develop something that they now take back to a centralized company and sell as a centralized product. You could see that happen.
Well, I'll tell you where it can come up in conversations with subnets that I've advised. It's about privacy. You may sell a service where 80% of the users or 90% of the users are very happy for it to flow over an open network to the miners who perform a service that's then returned. And that's great. It's super cost effective. And it's optimum to be developed over or to be deployed on Bittensor. But you may have a small subset of clients who wish that their, let's call it a job, their payload is private. And currently, a miner must receive that payload. A miner is generally anon. They're just hiding behind a UID. If you wanted to service those clients with that expertise, you've used Bittensor and the incentive mechanisms of Bittensor to identify a core group of people who perform a task to the best, the highest standards by which you require. At some point, you may want to reach out to them and say, hey, would you be prepared to sign a service level agreement, an NDA, and work privately with some of our customers? Some may say, no, I'm not responding to you. But if it is a feasible business option to be offering a pro product or an enterprise product where you're using the talent that you sourced through Bittensor to perform. I mean, there are other examples where the outputs from Bittensor are being combined with either proprietary data or other sources of data to provide a greater product. Industry expertise. There are some companies that are deploying within Bittensor who have years and years of expertise and also a lot of proprietary data in their industry. And they seek to enhance that data with the miner outputs. But the miner outputs are not everything.
You've worn many different hats in Bittensor, right? You've been a miner, subnet owner, validator. You run Taostats. Now you're talking about designing these subnets, and you said you had a couple subnets coming. What are all the subnets in your portfolio currently that you have a piece in?
We call it me. Obviously, I'm part of a greater organization. We developed 18 originally, having been asked to develop API access for the network and been a little bit of an arms race at the time with neural internet. That was the driving force behind CoreCell. And what we realized when building CoreCell, which at the time was called BitAPI, but it's now CoreCell, was that the outputs from the current inference subnet, the only one at the time, which was looking to reward diversity in this mixture of experts model, was not optimum. And we also saw that a lot of the network was not orientated towards organic queries, something I've spoken about a lot. And a lot of people subnets had just been released, and everyone was building subnets based on the same template building blocks. And even though I'm not an AI/ML engineer or particularly I'm not a talented subnet builder, I understood that we needed to do something a little bit different to stimulate growth. And so we took away the worry of actually providing the inference and just use existing centralized API endpoints. Yes, from a marketing point of view, you can also say that we're providing unrestricted access to GPT, and it was at the time being used for data sets, but that was quickly stopped because it was not very popular with GPT. With OpenAI. What we then did was I then worked with Namare, who's now gone on to found Rayon Labs, who wrote 19, which we supported initially and have a stake in. So there's obviously 18 and 19. And that was the building blocks on which we could really push CoreCell. We wanted CoreCell as a product then to encompass the outputs from many, many subnets and provide API access to many, many subnets. And we really pushed in that. And we were possibly too early in that because the subnets were not there in producing enterprise-grade usable or consumer-grade usable outputs. And so as we tried to incorporate them into the playground, we would find fault. And as things evolved and the landscape evolved over the 6 months, it started to shift towards subnets being responsible for building their own infrastructure and their own products. And it started to be less economically viable for them to be supporting validators or any external entity who was building these products. So CoreCell in that way, I wouldn't say it's remained stagnant. It's remained very attached to 18 and 19. It hasn't had a need to use any other inference subnet because none of the other inference subnets are offering anything that 19 is not. And so CoreCell does what it does. And then me personally switched my focus back to Taostats, which was very much needed. Building up a team takes time. And we had a period where we really had to rebuild the team to understand where we were going to take Taostats into the future. And it took some time. And Namare went off and formed Rayon Labs, which has now produced what I would consider to be two of the strongest subnets on Bittensor, which is gradients and shoots. So from when you say me, I have no part in those particularly. Mine was not a developer in 18 or 19. I like to say in 18 was my idea. There was Fish that built it, and then we've kind of passed responsibility back and forward in terms of updating and then developing it. We've now taken it back on board in terms of maintaining it. But in the later days towards dTAO, I miss talking about subnets because Namare has been very, very busy off doing his things. And I had a couple of chance encounters. I would say that a lot of people that came to me wanted me to back subnets, constantly backing subnets. And contrary to popular belief, we weren't backing subnets. We weren't paying registration fees for anybody that came to us asking for it. Because in the early days when we considered it, it turns out the code and the subnets were terrible. And we didn't want to put our name behind it. So we said, I think we did one. I'm not going to single them out. And we let it get deregistered within a week or so because it was awful. They wouldn't show us a code base before. I mean, it's an easy gamble to take as an investor because you get your funds back. But I think they assumed that because we backed them, they would get emissions, and we didn't. So I stayed away from it. But in my quest to show how I feel things should be being deployed on Bittensor, we've actually backed two very different subnets. Also three, actually. I forgot about that. There is another one. And two of them will be launching soon. One of them is Condensers, which is 47, which is actually currently live. And for me, that was about building relationships with developers. Working with the developer from 47, I felt was very important to both him and myself. I now have him working with him on the new subnet, which will come out soon. And for me, what I want to show is the launch of subnets as a business, as a product, with everything ready, working to go, that people can look at and not only look at from a technical point of view, like, oh, this is an interesting use of Bittensor. They can look at it from a custom point of view and say, oh, this is a product that I would like to use. And the two may not be related. The customer may have nothing to do with the Bittensor network. And then from an investor's point of view, you can say, I can see this, so I can see a growth in valuation here, and I'm prepared to invest by acquiring the dTAO, the alpha token for this subnet. So that's what I want to do, because we've yet to see a post-dTAO full subnet product launch to my satisfaction.